All right, John Lindsey, it's a pleasure to have you on. For the audience, this is, in my opinion, kind of a cool story. But we rolled in the same friend circles growing up as kids, but never shook hands and became friends ourselves until a few months ago when we picked up just our business conversations. And you've obviously been super helpful for us in our junk raider operation, so we appreciate that. But for the audience, John is comes from a family of folks in the storage business, and that's primarily what you do today. Although you have your hands in a lot of different ventures, even outside of storage. So I'm eager to get the audience that viewpoint from you as well. But John, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and what you're doing now?
Yeah, thanks, Davis. Appreciate you having me on. And again, small world coming full circle from days of Raleigh, Durham to being adults with children now. We've come a long way, and it's fun to
Yep.
reconnect here. So to give everyone a quick background, like Davis said, I'm John Lindsey, co-founder and president of Lindsey Self Storage Group. My family's been in the storage business since 1969. My father was a developer. He built storage facilities starting in Dallas, Texas, like I said, back in the late 60s, early 70s. And then when we moved to the Carolinas in 1990, he built out a couple large portfolios across North Carolina. So I grew up pouring concrete, whether I liked it or not. I was on job
Yeah.
sites from an early age and said, Dad, I don't want to pour concrete anymore. That is just not my cup of tea. And so in 2012, my brother and I started Lindsey Self Storage Group together as a self storage brokerage firm. We have now expanded beyond the Carolinas, do work all over the US, Europe, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. We've transacted everywhere from Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam to Mexicali, Mexico, Marseille, France to Weatherford, Texas. So you name
Mhm.
it, we're across the board. We have built, we have managed, we have owned, we have brokered, you name it. We've been in every facet of the storage industry. Brokerage is what takes up 98% of our time, though, and that is our sole focus today. And again, Davis and I are lucky enough to link back up and excited to catch up today.
Yeah, that's amazing. I appreciate it. And there's a lot of different rabbit holes we can go down here with your background. But for starters, backing all the way up to the beginning with the family business, did you all, because you hear about it obviously, in movies and whatnot. Oh, I got into the family business, or my folks are put right. What attracted you to actually follow in those footsteps that your dad had kind of put in place and get into storage? I mean, was that just a natural, I like this business, I like being around it, or did you feel kind of a pull because it was the family business? Like, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it was double-edged sword. My dad and I were super close growing up, so I just wanted to do what dad did to an extent. But I knew that my passion was not in construction. To me, it's like watching paint dry. It just wasn't my area. But I also recognized I was like, I'd be a fool to not take advantage of this like vast knowledge network at my fingertips and at least try and reapply it in a different capacity. And when I
Yeah.
launched the Self Storage Group, my dad was 77, I think. So he was about to retire. He was ready for me to just take over the construction business. So it was great. He had all the time in the world for me to just pepper with storage questions. And he didn't know anything
Yeah.
about storage brokerage really, and didn't know anything about capital markets those days and everything. He was just an old school build it and they will come type. So it was great as far as peppering him with questions and again and asking if he knew so and so in the industry. But um, I fell on my face a lot those first couple of years, and I'm thankful for my process that I went through, Davis. But it was certainly a learning lesson those first 3 to 5 years, to say the least.
Yeah. Well, give the audience a view into your day to day and kind of what
Yeah.
storage brokerage actually means. Because candidly, John, I don't know that your role and folks like you existed in the marketplace prior to me meeting you. Right? I didn't even know, because it's mainly because I'm not in the storage space. I don't own
Yeah.
storage units. I don't rent from storage units. But like, talk to us about like what your day to day looks like. How do you, John, get compensated? I figure it's much like a realtor, right? You're a broker in the middle of a transaction, but like, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yep, great question, and I get that all the time. So,
Yeah.
just as someone would help you buy or sell your house, I am a licensed real estate agent, and I help people buy and sell storage facilities in its most simplistic form. I get paid
Yeah.
a fee from either the buyer or seller, depending on who I'm representing, to handle that transaction for them. And
Hmm.
it's super fun because I might be representing a 80-year-old gentleman in rural North Carolina who's selling his $500,000 facility, or I might be selling a $50 million portfolio to a publicly traded company. So
Wow.
we run the gamut and exposure range as far as product type and what we offer and what we transact with. But really, just what's super fun for me is helping a lot of these owners who are at retirement age or the tail end of their careers really capitalize on what they've created and make life-changing money. Because you might
Yeah.
sell houses and move a couple times, you might get into this out of that, but especially the single owner operator who built a site 20 years ago, they're 62 and ready to retire, and I have the pleasure of telling them their facility's worth $3 million and they have no debt on it. Like, that's life
Yeah.
changing. And so it's
Right.
super fun for us to get to welcome people through that process and show them the way so that they're insuring top dollar. We make it a seamless transition for them, and we make it just as simple as possible with the best buyer that we can find them for their asset.
Yeah, that's awesome. I got to imagine that that's like a dopamine hit
Yeah.
every time you go through that process and the names are on the dotted line. Why global? Because that caught my
Yeah.
eye or caught my attention every time you mention it. Why are you in global markets outside of the fact that I'm sure you love to travel and see all these different
Yeah.
parts of the world? But why did you decide to expand outside the U.S. with what you're doing?
So great question, because originally, we had started in the Carolinas. That's our backyard. We know those areas super well. We know the markets, and eventually we just started. We do a deal here, and someone say, "Well, can you sell my site here?" And we just kind of slowly started organically getting pulled all over the place. And then in 2017 or 2015, excuse me, we had a client ask us to go over to the European conference and say, "Hey, can you find out some more about this? We've heard that there's an opportunity to go to Europe." So
Hmm.
my brother and I went over, went to the trade show, did a tour to Europe, and hit 8 countries in 8 days, and visited with
Wow.
facility owners and operators. And so we think there's a real opportunity here. This feels like the U.S. 20 years ago. Um, we were one of the only American firms that I think successfully established that gap in connection. A lot of firms were fly by night, and when it didn't work once, they were out and they came back. It was too complex. We were super patient. My brother and I speak a couple languages, which I think helped, and really invested time and energy in continuing to build those relationships abroad. And in 2019, we transacted our first portfolio in the Netherlands. Our big buyer that we work with in the States has now done over 40 deals throughout Europe,
Wow.
whether it's the Netherlands or France, Spain, Portugal, Germany, you name it. Like, we've looked at deals all over Europe, the UK as
Awesome.
well. And so it was a very organic process to that. And I'm sure, as you mentioned in the past, you didn't even know storage brokers existed. You can imagine
Yeah.
how small the storage industry is. Our
Yeah.
largest international conference is only about 3,500 people. So once we started doing deals in Europe, there was an immediate opportunity to do stuff in Asia, and most recently Latin America for us as well. So we have continued to expand into countries and cities I never thought we'd even look at, let alone would have storage, and it's been super fun for me to kind of continue to explore that.
So in the same vein of 3,500 people at that conference, in this just the closeness of the industry, where do you think the industry is going in the next 5 to 10
Yeah.
years? Like,
Mm.
knowing what you know about market conditions, our economy, both here onshore and abroad, and what people
Yeah.
are doing. I mean, I could guess, right, that we're always going to continue to accumulate crap because we're a consumption
Yeah.
driven economy. But like, do you foresee like just the physical brick and mortar storage facilities like continuing to thrive because of that, or what are you seeing on your side?
Yeah. It's the same reason Junk Raider will always have business next month. We as Americans love to consume product. And as much as everyone wants to point at the millennials and say that we're non-materialistic and we like travel the world, I call bullshit. We are the
Yeah,
highest consumer generation of all time. We buy disposable H&M stuff you can throw away next week. We buy photos, we buy shoes, we buy everything. And
yeah,
so on top of that too, we're inheriting all of our parents' stuff as they retire. They're like, well, and then you feel guilty about throwing away heirlooms and whatnot. And so there's this huge consumption trend amongst our generation. We're the largest generation in the world almost. So we're only going to become, larger owners of stuff. So I don't see brick and mortar storage going anywhere. There might be new trends that change how things process and whatnot. And the storage industry as a whole in the U.S. will certainly continue to grow. There are thousands of facilities built every single year in the U.S., and I don't see that stopping at all, especially in high growth markets like Raleigh, Durham, or Charlotte, or Tampa, or Nashville. Like,
mhm,
there's as long as there's an increase in population trend, there will be an increase of storage facilities. But
yeah,
what's interesting to note So there are about 50 to 55,000 facilities in the US, depending on what you define as a facility. In Europe, there's about 4 to 5,000 across UK and Europe. They're expecting that number to double in the next 7 to 10 years. We will
Mm.
never again see the U.S. market double. We've hit at such an inflection point over the last few years that we're going to continue to grow, but not at that rate. So I think people always ask me like, "What's next? What's the new market?" I think the UK and Europe is really the next place that
Mm.
adventuresome capital should take a look at going to. It's tough. I mean, there's a language barrier, a currency barrier, accounting practices, legal, you name it. It's a different animal, currency trade. But if you can make it work, that is definitely the next ripe opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Where do you, what are the barriers to, if somebody's interested maybe in doing what you do or being a storage unit owner, right? I want to
Mm-hmm.
go and develop land or buy a piece of land, put some storage units on it. What do you,
Correct.
I'm sure you've probably advised people in an
Yep.
unofficial way in
Yep.
this regard in the past, but like, what do you tell people about the storage unit business versus any other business they could start or get into?
Yep. So number one, I always advise people if you don't have access to a large amount of capital or you don't have a development or acquisitions background necessarily, um, partner with someone who's already in the space or invest in a storage fund that's already in the space or join a mastermind group that's already in the space. Ride the coattails of people who've been super successful and learn the ropes first. If you have background of acquiring businesses or development in any capacity, then I think you have a little more flexibility as to maybe buying your own facility with no partners up front or building your own facility. But again, I would caution everyone: hire the best, get the right feasibility study done, get the right third party manager done, hire the right broker, hire the right GC. This is a
Hmm.
generational wealth tool for you. This is
Yeah.
you're gonna double your money every time you build a project, 15 to 20% IRR. Like, it's not a 10x get rich quick overnight. So don't treat it like that. Like, invest the money to do it right the first time and protect your
Yeah.
investment, because this could be a game changing, again, generational wealth tool for you over time.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times people come in and they're like, oh, I'm going to leverage it to the teeth. I'm going to borrow whatever to get this done and I'm going to flip it. It's just
Yeah.
not really how things go in our space. And there was a blip in time through COVID where a lot of people were getting away with it, but already now we're seeing people kind of getting caught with their pants down, and it's not going to
Hmm.
be pretty over the next year or so.
Yeah, I remember what I was going to say prior to that last question, but fun little quick story, and I won't name names here, but they're very close to me,
Yeah.
and they're the type that inherited the parents' stuff, so
Mm-hmm.
it sits in a storage unit, and they think, oh, we'll give it to our kids, right, or their grandkids, or whatever, and it never
Yep.
happened. It
Yep.
sat in the storage unit for I don't even know how long, at least 10 years, but they
Yep.
were paying 100 or 200 bucks a month for the storage space. And
Yep.
then they got pissed because they had to hire, somebody that came out and charged them 300 or 400 bucks to take everything away. Right? They weren't getting paid for these items. They finally were like, "All right, we got to liquidate these assets because like nobody needs them, and we're just
Yep.
paying for the storage unit." So, to your point, we are as an economy, as a nation, we're very sentimental and we're very
Correct.
hopeful that things will transfer among generations. But like, it's just not the world, at least in my experience, that we live in anymore. So, um,
No.
but we'll hold on to those memories as long as possible. On your
Correct.
side of things, John, with your business, how do you generate leads, right? Folks
Mm.
that you want to work with as a broker in exactly what you do, but like, how do you generate leads? Is it all referral based? Do you do Google Ads? What's that? What's it look like?
Yeah, so back in the day, a lot of it there was a little bit of a transition where people, at least probably, especially North Carolina, knew of my father or had worked with him in the construction side. So it was really great. Like, there was a little bit of carryover from the family name at first, and I think that certainly helped me at least get my foot in the door with some people. I, as a 22-year-old, would show up to conferences not knowing anyone.
Yeah.
I would talk to anyone
Mhm.
that would listen to me. I would shake hands with any operator that would. I was driving sites and driving markets and just praying at 22, 23 years old that someone had heard of my dad at least and would at least be like, oh, yeah, I sat on a board with your dad in the 90s. Like, come on in. I'll give you 5 minutes to make your pitch. And that was my
Yeah.
first like entrance. I was eating shit sandwiches and driving 50,000 miles a year and knocking on
Yeah.
doors. And And, once that started to build, a lot of our business today is very organic and referral based and repeat customer base. And, we do, the cold outreach and the follow ups and all that, but it's a grind. I mean, anyone will
Yeah.
tell you it is a pure sales environment. I mean, it is just a high volume game at the end of the day. And, I tell people all the time, you eat what you kill. We whale hunt for a living.
Yeah.
There's no handouts in this space. Our deal pipeline is really long. Unlike a house where someone could move every year if they want to. They might get
Yeah.
jobs and trade up and this and that. Like most owners are only going to sell their storage facility once. And I'm hoping
Hmm.
that I'm the one guy they choose to use in the next 20 years whenever they're ready to sell their facility.
Yeah.
So, like last year, for example, 2022, in the summer, we closed with an owner that I've been calling since May of 2012. So
Yeah.
my pipeline with him was, and I sent him an email afterwards. I was like, just so you know, over the last decade, I have
Yeah.
called you like 237 times. I've sent
Yeah.
you 50 whatever emails. I've taken you to dinner 9 times. Like, I am
Yeah.
thankful for this opportunity. And he and I are buddies now, and we get along great. We hang out, and a lot of my clients
Yeah.
do end up becoming friends. But I mean, it's a grind, and it's a long pipeline, and there's no guarantees until the accounts are wired at the end of the day. So I love
Yeah.
what I do. I love helping people. I love this space. There is this kinship to my dad and my family. My brother and I are fortunate enough to work together, and I built a tremendous team, and we're a very tight group, and we love kind of bringing each other up and through this process and stuff. But I love the chase. There's something about whale hunting every day that gets me out of bed, and it's storage is certainly our main focus. As you mentioned, we're kind of in some other asset classes as well, but this is where I spend 98% of my energy, and I absolutely love it.
Yeah. If somebody's hearing this, John, they're like, man, I didn't even think about that as a career or path I could
Yeah.
go into. And you're talking to them just about your experience and what you've done over a 10 or
Mhm.
20-year period. Maybe touch on like your background from an education perspective. Like, do you have a
Yep.
college degree? Are those things that you learned with that degree transferable to what you do today? Or is
Yeah.
everything learned just through your boots on the ground,
Yeah.
kind of, just pound the pavement type stuff?
So
What kind of skills and education people need, I guess is the question.
that's a great question. And I think generationally, we could probably agree to this comment. I loved college. I had a blast. College of Charleston was awesome. We also
Yeah.
called it the College of Knowledge. We had a lot of social life over 4 years, and I learned a lot. I will say, educationally, I did well in school. I loved school. Like I enjoyed the process. But not necessarily at all for what I do in any capacity. I even majored in commercial real estate. Like
Yeah.
I think it probably helped me better understand this, but like 90+% of what I used was learned on the job. It's
Yeah.
cutting teeth with owners and being on job sites. I learned more building sites than my dad than I did in college. So
Yeah.
anyone that wants to get in this space, I think having a general understanding of finance, Excel, real estate is all good, but I think there is something innate to I can teach someone real estate and storage and all that, but if you don't have that inner guttural salesperson and willingness to really put your face to the pavement, this is not the space for you. Again,
Yeah.
we even like our and this goes across the brokerage community board for commercial real estate, but in storage in particular, like anytime we have a new team member join, if they close their first deal in the first 6 months, that's impressive, in my opinion.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and so you think about like you come over and you may not get paid for 6, 7, 8 months. Like that, it's a big jump to make. Now, again, when
Yeah.
you do, it's great and it can be a very lucrative business, but you always have to have that next deal lined up, and there's no guarantees in our space. So it's not like day trading where you're like, oh, I made $1,000 there, I made 750 there, I made 500, whatever it is. It's a little
Mhm.
more, it's a little scary sometimes. But
Yeah.
again, if you have a long horizon and you're committed to the process, and again, this goes for I think any sales job, but particularly commercial real estate, it's a game of patience and persistence.
Yeah.
And so that
Yeah.
that to me supersedes any education.
Yeah.
Obviously, the only thing you really need to do is get your real estate license, and all you have to do to get that is be 18. So
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty low bar for that to be hit. And honestly, I'd rather take someone without a college degree who's ready to go light the world on fire than someone who has one who doesn't want to work.
Yeah, I get that. And we've interviewed a lot of realtors on this show, and they say something similar, but yours is even more poignant, I guess would maybe be the right word, because back to your point about just the volume of transactions or the lack thereof in the storage space is
Yeah.
so much less than it is in the housing market, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't even know what the stats are with how many houses get turned over every year, but it's, I'm sure, off the charts compared to how many storage units get sold. So like I totally understand that from your perspective when you go into this as a new career, like you got to be willing to wade in the waters and put your time in and be patient and probably find other ways to generate income on the side while you wait for a lot of these things to materialize in your storage brokerage business.
Yeah.
Last two questions, John, on the vendor side, as it relates, for folks like junk removal companies like mine, anybody listening that owns a business that could maybe be useful to the storage community. What are your thoughts there, just in general, on how storage unit companies or like how owners of storage units consume vendor services, if any? I know there's a lot of work that goes in on the front end of building out a site, like keypads, security systems, and especially today, right? You're putting a lot of stuff in place where you don't have to have personnel on site managing the facility. But I'm sure a lot of these facilities still consume services in one way or another. Maybe they're more technology services, SaaS products and whatnot. But can you speak from your angle, like what types of vendors are storage units, communities, and facility owners consuming today?
Absolutely. And it's a great question. I mean, perfect example, how we've been able to work together, Davis. I think there is a tremendous opportunity if anyone is questioning whether or not there's a place for your product or vendor company in storage, reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to tell you if I think there's a place for it and we could find a way to cross collaborate and work together. We love opportunities like that. But, again, whether it's junk removal, locks, security, tech, SaaS, repairs, general maintenance, landscaping. I mean, you would be shocked at the number of vendors that are used. And I think particularly at these unmanned facilities more than the manned facilities, because the unmanned ones just sub out individually a lot of the little projects that a manned facility would take care of by the managers themselves. So as we move towards more of a tech platform, which we're seeing this big shift in the industry right now, I think we're going to see more demand for subcontracting out to new vendors. So, the cool thing about our space is, there are not a lot of Apples and Googles. There's not a lot of just monopolies that dominate across certain vendor platforms. I think there are a few that shine through, but I would argue there's a lot of verticals that are very ripe for disruption in the storage space. So if any of your listeners are curious about, is there a place for me? We'd love to answer that question for them in the space.
Totally. And last question, in your brokerage deals, what's the craziest thing? I like to ask realtors this too, but like, what's the craziest thing, whether you're working with a buyer or a seller, that's ever come up in a transaction that you're like, man, I never would have thought of that, or that's a ridiculous ask, or anything that comes to mind? I'm sure you've had some fun stories.
I have two. One, in Ohio, I did not know that like Ohio's home to like Marathon Gas and a lot of these big natural gas companies, and I did not know that even an expired lease in the state of Ohio still stands in a court of law for having jurisdiction over a property. And we had a lease that had expired back in like 1950 something. And we were going to sell the property for this owner. And he's like, listen, this expired way before I ever bought the land, never been used. It's capped, no problem. And the title company said, no, like you don't have any proof that they are fully done with this. I'm like, well, the lease is expired. They said, no, in the state of Ohio, you have to have proof from them that they're, fully done with this, whatever. Well, as I'm sure you can imagine, a company from the 50s doesn't exist anymore. So we had to file paperwork after paperwork after paperwork with no response, obviously, because the company doesn't exist anymore, for like 9 months to prove that it no longer existed. And I was like, this is the biggest waste of time. So if you ever do a deal in Ohio, any real estate offerings, and there's a natural gas cap, be aware. The second was, we had a deal last year in South Carolina. It abutted a railroad in upstate South Carolina, and GSX, I think it was. And the setback from the train there was title that showed on the title from 1871. They actually had reference of the document in the title for their setback allotment off the center track of the train. And the fact that we were referring to a document that was almost 150 years old was
Wow.
that. So, and it made one of the buildings in the transaction obsolete, and it hadn't been
Hmm.
picked up in prior title searches. This title company had gone so far back though to find it. So it was complex to say the least. But buyer and seller were both not thrilled with the elimination of one of the buildings because no one would cover a title. So that was a pain in the ass, but we got through it.
Yeah.
We closed both those deals, by the way. They just took a lot longer than, the first one took almost a year when it should have probably taken 60 days. The second one
Yeah.
took almost 6 months when it probably should have taken 75, 90 days. So again, when I say the waiting game and being patient, like stuff 100%
Yes.
out of my control that they could have dropped after a year of due diligence if they wanted to. So, I tell
Yeah.
people all the time, one of the biggest value adds that we create is picking the right buyer who will
Mhm.
ensure that they hang on through those difficult times, because most people would have just
Yeah.
walked. So,
Mhm.
we thankfully had told them that, like, look, if you really want a group that's going to perform, we recommend going with these groups. And well, they got it done. So that's a lot of
Yeah.
like what we do. We do a lot of validating and we run a lot of defense for our sellers, but
Yeah.
that's what we get paid to do at the end of the day.
Yeah, I was gonna say on the outside of just being the broker there and being able to have good patience, like the buyers and the sellers on either side, they have to go through all of that stuff as well. So
Yeah.
interesting stuff, John. Well, I appreciate you jumping on, man. Like I said, for the audience, we've been getting to know each other the last few months, and this was kind of a summation of all of that. So I appreciate it, and hopefully the audience gets some value out of it. John, what's the best way for folks to find you, reach out to you? How do you prefer to be contacted if you want to be found?
Yep. So you can go to our website, lindseyselfstoragegroup.com. You can always email me, John at lindseyselfstoragegroup.com. We'd love to help you in any way, whether you have storage questions, vendor questions, want to get into the space, we can help you all in any capacity. And Davis, I appreciate you having me on the show, man.
You got it. And go Heels, by the way. John is
That's right, baby.
is a Tar Heel fan, and
That's right.
he lives in Durham, so don't let that throw you off. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, John, thanks so much for joining us, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Davis.